In today's lecture, we're going to continue working with control properties through code. Another way of saying that would be we'll be accessing these control properties programmatically. In addition, we'll be working with how to handle multiple buttons on a form and clearing out the text from multiple controls. Lastly, we'll be seeing what it takes to cause a button click to close the application down. So from within Visual Studio, I want to create a new project, and again we can click on this link here, or we can go to File, New Project. I want to select Visual C#, and I'm going to pick Windows Form Application. Now down here for name, I'm going to call this project Button Tester. To give it more of a call out, very similar to the camel case that we do in our properties and our control naming, I'm going to do capital B and capital T, and that visually lets me call out that second word so I can read that better. If you are using Visual Studio Professional or Developer, you'll have an additional text box down here that allows you to select the location of your project, but since we're using Express, we won't see that, and we'll see those options after we create the project. Everything looks good. I'm going to say OK. And it's created for me this empty project. Now, before I go any further, I want to make sure that I have my project set up right, and I also want to be very aware of where I saved it. This is important because if you ever want to back it up or move it onto a flash drive, you have to know which files you're actually after. So before I write any code, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to say Save All. And this will give us a prompt. And again, if you were using Visual Studio Professional, you would have seen this on that prior project creation screen. But here we have it after we do our initial save. So my default location is going to be where I had saved my stuff previously, and I had saved it out to my desktop. And for the sake of being able to find that later, I'm going to leave this where it is. Button Tester will be the name of the folder and also of the solution. We want to leave this checkbox checked, create directory for the solution, and hit save. And what I'll often recommend is, since we know the location of the project, I'm going to close down Visual Studio and I'm going to navigate over to my desktop, and now I can see that yes, it did create a button tester folder. Double clicking into that folder, at the very top I see I have an SLN file. That's our solution file. This is really the file that keeps track of everything that's part of our project. And then this folder here, which is where our form and a lot of the supporting files live. Double clicking the SLN file will open up the button tester project. And we're back to where we were before. Now, I've called my project Button Tester, and for what we're going to do in this exercise, we need to talk about what is it that we want on our form. Now, in your job as a developer, you'll be getting what are called requirements from either your boss or from a client. And often, they won't tell you what exactly it is that they want to see on the screen. If they do, that's great, but often it's going to be a very vague idea. They're going to say, I need an application that can do this, and they'll list off certain actions or processes that they'll want it to do. Usually it's got something to do with their business, an existing thing that they do on paper, or maybe it's a task that's handled by a bunch of people, and they want to simplify it through an application. And so you take these things, and we say they're the requirements of the project or the program, because in order for the software to be considered finished, it's required to do these things, and then everyone's happy. Occasionally you'll get a crude drawing, maybe on a napkin, on a piece of paper, that will tell you what it exactly is that you want it to look like. And you'll take that information and you'll create something called a mock-up or a wireframe. And often what a wireframe is it will look like a finished application, except you see a lot of the nice colors and the shades and the rounded corners, that will all be removed. Because the point of a mock-up or a wireframe is to show what the application is going to do, and you don't get hung up on minor details like the button color and if there's a gradient and the font of what the text looks like, and sometimes even the size of it. It shows you purely what's on the screen and what it's going to say. And so we're going to use this here, and we're going to be doing a lot of things like this semester, and a lot of your assignments work this way as well, of going along with these mock-ups to sort of drive what we're doing. If we were in a classroom, I would be drawing something like this on the dry erase board, but this is almost probably better because my art skills aren't the best. So this is what our application needs to do. This text here on the first line, I want this to load when your program loads on the load event. This text is going to be displayed on the screen. This second line of text is not going to become available until someone has clicked a button. And we can see down here we have 3 different buttons. I have a click me button, a clear button, and an exit button. So this click me button is going to be what causes this text to display. The clear button is going to clear out the text on both of these labels. And lastly, the exit button is going to cause our application to close. The only other detail we see on here is that my window has a title of button tester as well. So I'm going to leave this open in the background, and we'll be flipping through to use this as a reference, but I'm going to go back into my Visual Studio, and it looks like I closed it down, so I left open my solution folder. You probably have yours open still. Clicking on the SLN file, and that brings that right back up. So the first thing I wanted to do, because we usually go after the very easy stuff first, is I want to make my application look as close to this as possible. Now again, remember, this doesn't have fancy styling. It doesn't have a colored background or font. What we're really after is just the content on the screen. And when you start building an application, you'll be tempted to go through your form and make it look perfect and align all of your edges and make sure all of your buttons are the nice size. But really what we want to pay attention to when we start a program is that we give ourselves everything we need just to make sure the program is working. Typically you drag your controls onto the form, you have the right type, you give them the right name, and then you leave it be because you want to make sure that you can make what the program needs to do. You need to make it work the first time. And then when that is fine, you'll come back and then you'll come up and make the font nice and make sure your edges are aligned and have all the buttons lined up nice. So usually when we are working, our application is very ugly to begin with, and that's okay, because sometimes we need extra buttons, sometimes we need extra labels. It doesn't make a lot of sense to make sure they're all lined up perfectly. So the first thing I'm going to go after is I'm going to make sure I have 2 labels and 3 buttons. Selecting my form, going into the left margin of my screen, over the Toolbox tab will cause the toolbox to sort of fly out. I'm going to drag a label, and remember, you get that sort of that no symbol over the top. That tells you that wherever your mouse is right now, you can't put that label there. Same as if we drag out past our form, you still won't be able to drop it down. Dragging it onto the form, and we have that plus sign there. So, label, and now instead of dragging another label, I'm going to drag a button. Because what we can do, now that we have these controls, is we can copy them and paste them through to get what we need. So I'm going to click the label, right click, copy, click off of it back onto the form, right click, and paste. Just as if you were to copy and paste some word inside of a Microsoft Office document. Now I have 1 button, I want 2 more. Right clicking the button, copy, right click again, paste, and then do it again. Right click, paste. And now I have all the controls that I need. You'll notice I grabbed the handle here on my form and I dragged that out so that I have a little more room to work with. And now I know I said I want to wait to do font until the very end of the application, but with this it's a little small and I like to see big text for when I'm working. So clicking on this label here, and if your properties window isn't open down here in the lower right, you can right click on your label and select properties, and that will take you to the same thing. The property I am interested in is in font. Now you may have yours with this button here clicked instead. It'll have a little more of a yellowish orange background. That is under category. I usually go to this A to Z arrow so that all of the properties are sorted alphabetically. Scrolling up, picking the font, we have that triangle there. Clicking the triangle causes that to expand out. What I want is underneath font, I'm interested in the size property. It's at 8.25. Now I'm going to change that over to 14. And now I could go to all of these individually and set the font. But because of the fact that they are all controls, they all share a certain basic number of properties. One of those being the font size. So I can left click, hold my mouse button down, and select all of these. And you'll notice that there are quite a few less properties in our property window. That's because it only will display the ones that are shared or common amongst all of them. So now I can go to the font property, and you get a little bit of a different interface. You'll notice that instead of being able to expand it down, you get this dot 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 button. Clicking that, we say that's an ellipsis. Usually that's going to open up a window. We get all of this. We're going to ignore that. This last column under size, I'm going to pick 14. Hit OK. And now all of my labels and my buttons are big enough. And you'll notice to some extent the buttons are even a little too small now that the text is that big. So I have to resize these buttons, clicking individually, grabbing the handle, and I'm going to pull each of these down until there's enough text to display. And so we have a very basic beginning to what we need. Now let's go back into that image and say, okay, this one says click me, this one says clear, and this one says exit. Let's go and fix that on here. Clicking on the button, I'm interested in the text property to change what the button says. So scrolling down, and I will have this one say click me. And while we're at it, we should probably give these buttons a correct name. We want to use the proper naming convention for a button. If you recall, it's usually a 3-letter word, and it's an abbreviation of whatever the type is. In this case, it's a button, so we want BTN. And I'm going to name these buttons according to the text that appears on them. So this one is going to be called, and I'm scrolling up to the name. Name is at the top. Even though it's alphabetical, name is a very important property, so it's going to be at the top of the control. And I'm going to say BTN name. You'll see that putting click me there, we lost that text. All that is the text had wrapped below it. Expanding it out will cause all of the text to resize and fit in there properly. The next one, this is going to be our clear button. So scrolling down to the text property, I'm going to type in clear. Hitting enter will cause it to appear on the button. Scrolling up, I'm going to call this control BTN clear, button clear. And last, this is going to be our exit button. So scrolling down again to the text property, change that to exit, and the name of this button is going to be BTN exit. Okay, so we're a lot farther along. Holding up my wireframe, my mock-up, I can see I have my buttons correct. And now I have this, which we think is going to be handled through code, so we're going to leave that alone for right now. And I can see the title of my form is Button Tester. Over here, it says Form 1. Well, just as we want to change the text on a button, we go to the text property. The form also has a text property. So click your form, which means basically click any of this empty area, and scrolling down, you'll see there's a text property, and I can change that to say Button Tester. Now we're left with these labels. Because we didn't do anything to them, they still have their default text and their default name, which in this case is the same. So it says label 1, and we know that the name is label 1 too. So what I want is, I'm going to call this according to what it's going to do for the application. Now, this text here says it's going to be set on the startup of when the application starts. So we're not going to set this text through the designer now. Let's call this one Label Startup. This one is going to be set through on a button click. So we're going to call this one Label Button Click. We like to name our labels according to the kind of information that they're going to be displaying. So clicking on label 1 or right-click properties, it takes us to the text probably by default, and I want the name property in this case. And I'm going to call this one LBL Startup. Now, changing the name of a label does not change its text. We want to have a way of deciding or being able to tell that this in fact is that label. Now, when the form initially loads, this one's going to be blank and this one's going to have that text, but we still want to see something in our designer so we can know just by looking at it what the name of the control is. So scrolling down, I'm going to go to the text and I'm going to put in some placeholder text, and I want to have a way of making sure that I know just by looking at it that that's not really what the label is going to say. So we're going to use angle brackets around the name, and angle brackets, another word for them would be your less than and your greater than symbol. So holding down the shift key and going after what's normally the comma, but now is going to be our less than symbol, I'm going to do less than LBL Startup, and then a greater than symbol, or often we'll say close angle bracket. Hitting enter, now we have that on our form, and that looks very ugly, and it's intentional. We don't want to forget that this is not really going to be the final value of this form. We're going to do the same thing for the other label. Click that in the properties window, go to name. This one will be called LBL Button Click. I want to have a good way of being able to tell what the name of the control is just by looking at it. And because it's going to be blank, we're going to give it some placeholder text. So angle bracket LBL Button Click. Close angle bracket, hitting enter. Now, I want to be clear on this. The angle bracket, it doesn't do anything for us in terms of code or programming. I'm putting it there because typically that's not a letter or a character that you see on a form very often. There's really no confusion when you look at it and you say, oh, well, yes, that's right. That's something that we're going to be clearing out. So now that we've done all this control work, and we haven't written any code yet, we should still be safe. But before we do anything else, we're going to run it the first time just to make sure we haven't broken anything or made anything sort of weird. So a shortcut for building, you can press F5 on your keyboard. You can press this green arrow or you can go to the debug menu and you can say start debugging. This will cause your application to fire. And now we have exactly what it is that we built, nothing else, but we've gotten that far. And we can click the buttons, nothing's going to happen yet, but we know we have a pretty good start of our application. Now we can start writing some code now that we have the interface built. The first thing I want to do, and I'm going to bring up my mock-up again here, and I think I closed that down. Is this part here. This text is set on startup. So going in, we want to figure out, well, what code executes when this program starts up. And if you recall, it is the form load event. Now, anything that is interesting happening inside of Visual Studio, you get at it by double clicking the control that you're talking about. So in this case, the form load happens on the form. And so by going in and double clicking the form, that's going to cause Visual Studio to create this function. And this is where we type our code when we want it to fire when the form loads up the first time. Remember, a function is a piece of code inside of Visual Studio, inside of our code, where you're able to group together lines of code all into sort of one object. So in this case, this whole piece will execute when the form loads the first time. This is the name of the function. This curly brace here tells us that this is the start of the function and this is the end. So where we want to be able to write our code is in between these two. And if you click on one of them, it will even highlight it in gray so that you can see where the start and the finish is. So what we are interested in is LBL startup. We want to change the text on this label so that it says this text is set on startup. And that's, if we were to do this through the designer, we would go after the text property. Well, we can do the same thing in code. We can do the same thing programmatically. So from inside of our form load, I'm going to start typing out the name of the control that I want to access. In this case, it's LBL. And now, because of our naming conventions, we see that there are only two labels in our project. And we can pick between the two of them. The one I want is LBL Startup, so I can use my arrow keys to pick it. And once I do, I can hit Tab, and it will auto-complete it for me. You could also type the whole thing out if you wanted to, but this is a shortcut, and getting used to using the arrows and the Tab key will really save you a lot of time. Now, I want the text property on this label. So remember, after the name, we say dot. That is a way of saying label startup has the following properties, and we can see all of them, but what we're interested in is the text property. So we type TE, and it will select text for us, and you can either finish typing or hit Tab for it to autocomplete. Now, we want to set the value of the text. And anytime we want to set a value, on the left-hand side is what we're interested in, and we say equals, and then whatever's on the right-hand side is going to be the value that we're setting. So in this case, opening up our image here, we want it to say this text is set on startup. When we're talking with letters or pieces of text, we have to put them inside of quotes. So we say, quotes, this text is set on startup. You have to have matching sets of quotes at the beginning and at the end. And lastly, to tell Visual Studio that this line of code is done, we say semicolon. So when I start this up, that first label should say exactly what it is that we're looking at. At 5, this text is set on startup. But there's a problem. We still are seeing that old placeholder for the button below it. So we want to clear this out. And to clear it out is very similar to how you would clear it out inside of the designer. You would click that label, you would go to the text property, and you would delete all of the words and the letters inside of that property. But we want to do it programmatically. So going back into our code, I'm interested in this button click label, so I'm going to say LBL button click, and this is also a label, so it has a text property, equals. Now if you think about deleting all of the text inside of that text property, wouldn't that leave you with a string that's empty? So we have the start quote and the end quote, and in between there's nothing. That's the same thing as us going in and deleting the text from the text property box. And now we see that when this starts up, this text gets some words, the one below it is empty now. Okay, let's take a look at here. What else do we have? We have our clear button and we have our exit button. So starting the application again, this one seems, oh, we need to do that one too, but we're good for the load. So let's actually go after the click me button now, and we'll do the clear one after that. So our mockup told us that this label should say this text is set on button click. So in order to get code to fire when someone clicks a button, we go after the button that we're interested in and we double click it. This will generate a function that fires when that button gets clicked. We have it already. That one was called, it should have been called button click. Oh, I typed it in wrong. It should have been called button click me. It's button name. We're just going to go with it. Double click that, and sure enough it says button name click. Now we can use the same approach that we did for form load. We said label name dot text equals, and then the text that we wanted to set. In this case we want LBL button click. So I'm going to type LBL. It selected it for me through IntelliSense. Hit tab. Dot text equals, and now this one will say this text is set on button click. Matching sets of quotes, start quote, end quote, semicolon to end it. Hit F5 to run it. This looks good. Hit click me. This one works too. Great. On to the clear button. The clear button, we want to clear out both of these labels. And now we're starting to write some code here. We're starting to get 3 lines there. That's more than we've written so far. And if you look already, we already kind of have some of this. We know that, yeah, when we started this up, it was already clearing out that label. So we could probably reuse some of this code here. But first, we have to get at this button's clicks. Now, each button is independent. So clicking this button isn't going to cause anything to happen for this one. They are all separate independent objects. So each of them can have a separate click event. So going in here, btn clear, double click, and it generated btn clear click for me. Now I mentioned we can reuse some code, right? So scrolling up a little bit into your form load, left click, drag over that whole line right there. Once selected, right click and copy. Go back into your button clear click, right click, paste. It is possible for us to copy whole lines of code out. As long as you're careful and you pay attention to what you're doing, it should be just fine. And in fact, it'll save you time. What happens is when you copy several lines and then you don't change them over, and you don't really see it because it's a whole lot of code altogether, You just have to be careful when you do copy and paste code. So we have LBL button click cleared. Our other label is called LBL startup, and we want to clear that one out as well. So we say LBL startup dot text equals quote quote the empty string, nothing in it. I'll click this one, make sure that's still working. We always want to test every time. We never know when we might have bumped something to break existing code. That looks like it works. Hitting clear will clear out both labels. Can go back here to regenerate this one. Clearing will clear it out. So really all that's left is to do this exit button. So going into your designer, clicking on exit, now double click so that it created button exit click for us. Now this is a code that we don't know yet. It's a special line of code that's built in as part of the framework, and typing it and then having it run will actually cause our application to close down. So we're going to say application dot exit. Now here's the fun part. You have to put an open and close parentheses because it is a function. And we'll learn more about that as the semester goes on. But you have to type it like this in order for this to work. Hit F5, click me, clear, and then last, exit will cause the application to close down. So we have a good set of tools behind us. The only thing that's missing now are some comments. Comments are what we put in our program to leave ourselves notes on what it is that the code reads. This doesn't exactly read perfect like an English sentence. You would not tell someone, oh yeah, I typed LBL button click dot text equals. You would explain what it is that you're doing. And that's where comments come in handy. Is we want to leave ourselves notes when we're writing code so that a month or 6 months from now we know what it was the heck we were trying to do. So comments are prefixed by a special sequence of characters. It is // // is the one that's next to your right shift key. Now you'll notice that this shows up in green. Green means the line is commented out, meaning whatever you type, it's not going to try and treat it like code. It's going to just pretend that it's some words, it's a sentence, and it's not interested. The compiler is only interested in code. So anything we type after those 2 slash marks won't affect anything else in the program. And so this is where we start typing it in what it is that we're doing. And so here we say setting the button label text on a button click. And so we're explaining what it is that we're doing. We want to do something down in here too. So I'm going to say clearing out both labels. Again, you need / in front. If you took that off, Visual Studio thinks that you're writing code and you're going to get all sorts of errors. So remember to put the / in front of it. And then lastly, here we'll say closes the application. So now we have a complete program. We have a nice looking form. It does just what we said it would do and closes down when we're done. But the code part, we want to make sure we put in enough comments so that we can tell what is going on. I'll put one for form load too. Sets the startup label on form load. It probably seems like you won't ever forget what you're writing in this class. But 6 months from now, you're going to be working on a different project. And you're not going to remember this as much as you might think. And that's why we leave ourselves labels. Often, you'll say, well, you're commenting your code out for your coworkers, which is fine and nice. But what you're really doing is leaving yourselves a note in the future, really. And you'll appreciate it, and you'll thank yourself for it. Okay, so this is a nice application. We have multiple buttons. We're setting text, we're clearing text, and we are closing out the entire form on an exit click. We could hit the X, but now we have a button to do it instead. This is the end of this lecture. Hopefully, we'll see how we could have taken what we had in the last lecture and sort of made it a little more complex and made it a little more interesting and have a lot more things going on.